In this segment, we're going to be discussing Alastair Campbell's statements on the Labour Party, and I think, like he's a guy who, war crimes. You can't say war crimes aside, or alleged war crimes aside. He's a guy who is very, I think, politically astute. He's a guy which I think the Labour Party kind of need. If he wasn't so kind of tainted with the Iraq War, because I think when it comes to politics, I think he really changed. He changed the matter. I think under Tony Blair, in terms of the spin doctor stuff, the ability to try and control narrative. If you watch that show, Thick of It, with Peter Capaldi, that's when I realised that okay, this is big dog mentality, effectively.
They were supposedly laser-like on delivery, and then it comes to this 3 months on.
Well, you say it comes to this as though, the whole thing is a complete irrecoverable shambles, which I don't think it is. I actually think Keir Starmer started pretty well. The government settled in pretty well. I think the riots, although he handled them well, knocked them off course. I do think the combination, excuse me, of the fuel, the pensioners' fuel allowance being taken away, or the announcement of it being taken away, whilst I understand they wanted to establish this sense of the black hole, I think that sort of dropping out of a clear blue sky is what I mean about strategy not being narrated. People will think, well, hold on a minute, we voted for change. Is this really the change we voted for? You add that into the so-called freebies stuff, which is, nothing by comparison with what Johnson and co got up to. But it spoke against the narrative on which they won the election.
And this is the thing, that a lot of the pro-Labour goons fail to understand, is that people hold Labour to a higher standard. We expect crap from the Tories. That's expected of them. The only thing that people really want from them is some sort of economic competence, really just to keep their taxes lower. That's, I think, what the general expectation is for the Conservatives, that they are in the pocket of big business, but they hope that, their taxes won't go up too much and public services will be somewhat functional. But Labour will always have higher standards, because as they should do, because it was meant to be on the side of working class people. So again, this is one of the things the goons don't understand, because they keep saying, oh, but what about the Tories? The Tories. It's like, it's, the Boris Johnson's administration, incredibly awful. Liz Truss's administration, incredibly awful. But when you look at Theresa May, David Cameron and Rishi Sunak, those three did what is kind of expected of a Tory government largely, which is just to keep things kind of ticking along, and not do anything stupid. Really, that's, I think, the public's expectation of the Tory party, because their expectations of politicians in general is incredibly bad. So this is one of the things that people, especially pro-Labour people, don't understand. They keep talking about how these gifts were declared and therefore we are kind of morally more justified and on the right side of the rules when it comes to the gifts, and Boris Johnson's on the wrong side of the rules. But as Campbell kind of points out, that doesn't wash with people. That's the problem that Labour are having.
Which was very, very high standards in public life. Now, as I say, these are all recoverable, but you cannot make too many missteps in government. Government is harder than opposition. Labour governments are held to much higher standards than Tory governments, and I hope that this is the reset that's needed, where people understand this is really hard. They've got big missions, which, frankly, they should be what we're talking about.
Exactly, not getting a budget out early enough, not setting out much bigger policies. These are the key problems that they're having.
Should be what the government are emphasising, with constant explanation as to what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it.
That should be what the press rounds are about. They could, instead they've had to battle the stuff on the winter fuel allowance, they've had to battle the stuff on the bribes, when, these are massive misplays from the government. What they should have been able to do, really, is push how they dealt with the riots, push how they're dealing with the prison system, the prison problems, push how they're going to improve workers' rights and things like that. That's what they should have gone for. You're starting off with the black hole and all of this economic pain. Again, another misstep, because people want optimism. You talked about change. You talked about fixing the country. And then, you start talking about a painful budget, which basically just sounds like austerity. Like, are you stupid, my guy? Is your brain not functioning? And this more from Campbell here.
Politics, you see this right around the world. They're not prepared to give politics and politicians much of the by way of benefit of the doubt, and that's why you can't afford too many missteps. You can't afford too many things which allow the public and allow the media. We still have a very biased right-wing press in this country, to say they're all the same as each other.
What drives me nuts is you got all of these people saying, oh, Starmer can't do too much because we have a biased right-wing press, and then he does massive misplay after massive misplay, and they don't criticise the misplay. ways. All they do really is criticise the right-wing government. It's like, if you stop misplaying, you give the right-wing press less to talk about, and they go for pathetic attacks. That's what you have to drive them down into. Basically have nothing stories. But instead, all you do is keep feeding them ammunition. You might as well load the gun up for them at that point.
Labour are very different to the Tories in many, many ways, in policy, in values, and I think actually we now have the most working class cabinet that we've ever had, frankly.
I mean, sure, but you've got people who really aren't doing much for working class people.
But if you're not constantly, as I said earlier, developing, executing, and narrating a very clear strategy, then a sense of a vacuum can develop, and then that will be filled with stuff like this. So what you have to be doing the whole time is making sure that you guys in the media and the public have things to think about and concentrate on that are coming from government that actually relate to their lives and actually are about the big things and the change that the government promised.
And, making tangible improvements to people's lives. Again, it's so kind of simple when he breaks it down like that, which is basically give people other stuff to talk about. That's what the government should be doing. Is if there's two ways you can play this. You can play this the Boris Johnson and the Donald Trump way of endless scandals, so people can't concentrate and they get lost and they get bored, right? Because you're a typical politician, you're constantly fumbling around and people just like, I just can't be dealing with this. Or you have minimal scandals, right? And you give the press constantly positive stories to talk about, stuff that is way harder to spin, like the protections for workers' rights that they're coming out with, which kind of is meant to end things like fire and rehire. It's meant to end, quote, exploitative 0 hours contracts, which, again, how do you define what is exploitative and what isn't, stuff like that. But if you push at that angle more and you go in the media and you keep running with it and you keep telling people how that's going to improve their lives in terms of their security at work, that's something where the media will find it boring, yes, but they'll be forced to talk about it because there's not much else for them to talk about. That's what Labour have to be doing. This idea that Campbell might struggle in this kind of modern media environment, complete garbage. I think he would thrive really well in this modern media environment because he would have control over things like their social media pages, and I think he would do a phenomenal job. As much as I hate the guy, and I really do, when you look at the big operators after him, when you look at the guy Boris Johnson had, he slips my name, the bald geezer, and you look at Morgan McSweeney, these guys are completely inept at their roles, really. They're good at kind of winning power, good at spinning things, but once they come into government, they're completely awful. Fair enough, they're dealing with really incompetent prime ministers, the one who had to deal with Boris Johnson, the one who's having to deal with Keir Starmer now, compared to, Tony Blair, who was a lot better, a much smoother operator. But ultimately, I think this is a guy they should be listening to, really. Unless you're looking at invading countries. Alastair Campbell is one of the more astute people within the media now. When it comes to political operations, he's very bright. And I don't like saying that because I don't like the geezer on a personal level, and I don't like his podcast partner, Austerity Boy. But you need to be giving the media constant positive stories to discuss and take away any negatives, because ultimately the media ran with the bribe story, the media ran with the winter fuel allowance, because when you look at the people who are watching their channels, when you look at the people who are buying their newspapers, it makes sense to go off those stories. Attacking old people, who do you think reads newspapers, who do you think watches daytime TV, attacking taking bribes, scandal. People love scandals. They love talking about them endlessly. The only thing worse than a money scandal is one where you have an affair, because people will talk about that loads, unless you're Boris Johnson, because you have about 50 of those. But, in my opinion, what Campbell said here is spot on. This idea that he might struggle in a modern media environment, like, give your head a shake, mate. This guy is much better than any spin doctor that, any of the prime ministers have had in recent years, I'll be honest. And like I said, I don't like the guy, but he's very good at his role, and you have to respect that. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. That's enough being nice to Alastair Campbell. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one.